I want to welcome you to the first Tegrity recording for Nursing 227. This is Carrie Lesmeister, the lead instructor for this lab and clinical course. And today we're just going to do an overview on what nursing math is, what dimensional analysis is, and what types of rules and expectations I have for you regarding the math quizzes that you'll have in your Nursing 227 lab. So first of all, this is your book. This is by Tracy Hornfelt, and we will be using this text both this semester as well as next semester. So calculating dosages safely is what you need to have for this math assignments in this course. Today we're going to basically just be going over the math guidelines, and so if you want to look at your handbook, this can be found on pages 34 through 36 of your Dakota Nursing Program handbook, and we're going to kind of just go through them one by one to make sure that we all have a clear understanding of what each of the items means. So number 1 says that we need to adhere to the Joint Commission do not use list. And so a lot of times, most often we'll remember this when we think of insulin. And so we no longer can just write that maybe a client's going to have 5U representing units. We need to write out the word unit. And so another thing that we used to see when providers would order medications would be they would write QD for daily, and sometimes that can be mistaken, and so now we're just writing daily or every other day. And the most important one probably that applies to us is this fourth one down, where we're going to talk about zeros. We want to make sure that we don't have a trailing zero, but that we do have a leading zero, and we're going to get into that as we keep going. But this is just a good informative graph to have in mind as we progress through this semester. So number 2 is that we do need to use a leading zero when we answer if the answer is less than 1. And so I have some little smiley and frowny faces here, and if we did not put the 0 before that decimal, the reason that it's important is because it can be very easy to miss that decimal. And so someone reading your math may misinterpret this, and instead of administering 0.2 milliliters of a medication, they may not notice the decimal and they may give 2 full milliliters. And we know that that's a huge difference in a dose. So anytime that you have less than 1 for an answer, you're always going to have a 0 before that decimal point. Now, when we look at number 3, we want to avoid trailing zeros. And so this is important because what if a person did not see that you had a 0 after? And it can also change the dosage. And so we wouldn't ever want to do 2.0 or anything like that, because that would change what we are seeing. And so we always just want to have just the numbers needed, no trailing zeros. When we look at number 4 and how to label the answer, all of my quizzes that are set up and exam items for this semester for 227 all have a direction in your question that will say do not include any label. I will always tell you what you're looking for. So in the example problem here, you can skim over it if you want, but there's a blank and then it says milliliters. So you know you're looking for milliliters. I already have it labeled for you. You will not type in milliliters when you answer that exam item. If you do type in milliliters, it will be counted wrong because you need to type in just the answer. And so this is just telling you when you type in the answer, don't use a label, please. So getting into how to use dimensional analysis now to actually look at answering and figuring out the answer to an equation. So this is an example from the book, and so we're going to pretend that the provider orders Restoril 0.03 grams PO at HS for sedation. You have a 30 milligram tablet available. How many tabs will you administer? And so this is how your problems are going to look that you're going to receive on your quizzes. And the main thing that you need to know to implement dimensional analysis and to successfully solve these problems is what you're looking for. If you can figure out what you're looking for, you have solved half of the problem. And so right here it's telling us we're looking for tabs, and that's exactly what we want. How many tabs will we give this client? And so how we will start out our problems is with looking at what is our end goal. And so we're not looking for milliliters, we're not looking for grams, because if I wanted to know how many grams to give the patient, that still doesn't tell me. I mean, when you think about in practice, I have a pill in front of me, and so knowing how many grams is what's ordered from the doctor, but even that doesn't tell you, if you needed to convert milligrams to grams or grams to milligrams. We need to know tabs. How many pills are we going to give this client? So when we have decided what we're looking for, which really always should be, let me see if I can get on my pointer here, which always should be given in your problem here. So it always should tell you tabs. And so here we've got tabs. So what we're going to always do then is start out our problem with what we're looking for. So we're going to start out with what we're looking for. We're looking for tabs. When you've decided what you're looking for, you always 100% of the time are going to take that label, and that label of what you're looking for has to be the numerator in your very first equation. Remember, numerator is that top part of that first equation. So if you can get to this point and you know what you're looking for, and you know that what you're looking for has to start out your problem, you are totally on the track to acing your math quizzes and math exams. So then our next step is looking at what should go under that tab. And so when we think about that in this problem, we know that we have 30 milligram tablets. Sometimes I'll tell students that this is like a husband and wife equation here. You can't split this up. The pharmacist is sending you tablets, and so here we've got our tablets, and the tablets are 30 milligrams. And so we can't change that. We can't make our tablets a different amount of strength, because this is what our pharmacy is giving us, or this is what we have available to us. And so tabs and milligrams have to go together in the exact same equation, just like they're together here in our word problem. They have to be together here in our equation. So we know that we were looking for tabs. We put tabs as our numerator, and then we know that tabs has to go with milligrams, because that's what our problem tells us. That's what our pharmacy has supplied us with. So we've got that down here in a less marked up version now. Now what we need to do is think about our next step. So we have milligrams here, but we can see that our doctor ordered, or our provider ordered, grams. And so we're thinking to ourselves, well, golly gee, what are we going to do with that? And so when you have dimensional analysis, what we can do is cancel out things. And so we need to have a way to cancel out our milligrams and convert to grams. And so what we're going to do is enter in a conversion step then. Since milligrams is in the bottom of our first equation here, milligrams has to be in the top of our next equation. And understanding this will take all the guessing work out of where numbers go. So you've got milligrams here, you're going to put milligrams up here. Now, since we're going to grams, and for example, not to micrograms, we only need that one conversion factor. So we know that milligrams and grams can be converted. So we're going to go ahead and put those labels in. A lot of students will go ahead and put the numbers in at this step. They'll put that 1,000 milligrams equals 1 gram. Other times students will get a little bit confused, and they'll maybe make the mistake that they'll put 1,000 grams equals 1 milligram. So sometimes just putting your milligrams here and your grams here right at this early point will help to just clear up your mind. Other times when students first get their math exam or their math quiz, when they have that blank scratch paper, I'll often recommend that they just write 1 milligram equals 1,000 micrograms. 1 gram equals 1,000 milligrams. Those kind of rock solid measurements that you've got to have memorized, because when you have them written on your paper, it takes all the chance of entering the wrong place for where the 1,000 goes and where the 1 goes. And so by putting in your labels first, and then by looking up at what you wrote on the top of your scratch paper when you first got it handed to you, then what your next step would be to I'm just going to keep going here a little bit different. So then all you would do is just enter in your 1,000 and your 1. And so that kind of oftentimes will help students. Okay, back to this step. So we've decided that we're here, and then we can go in and we can enter so we've got our 30 milligrams. Our 30 milligrams has to go with our 1 tab because this is what's available per tab. And then we talked about this conversion factor. We've got milligrams here, so milligrams needs to be up here. If I would have had my scratch paper, I maybe would have wrote on there that 1,000 milligrams equals, I'll put it on this side, equals 1 gram, because I write that down before I get confused and then forget what I'm doing or get a little bit nervous about my math quiz. And then what we're going to do is add another step. And so we've got grams here, which is perfect because our provider has ordered grams. So then we know that we have to have grams up here. And so then we're going to enter our 0.03 grams into that last aspect. When we talk about dimensional analysis, we can then start to cross off things. And so what we can do is cross off those 2 milligrams. They cancel each other out. Next, our grams cancel each other out. And what are we left with? The only thing that doesn't cancel out is tabs. And that's totally perfect because that's exactly what we're looking for. Sometimes students struggle as well as how do they enter this in their calculator? What do they do to get the number that I get? And so what I do is I just type in 1000 times 0.03. You don't even need to push equal at this point, and then you can just push divided by 30. You can put in your ones, but you don't have to. They don't change the answer. There's no need to use them. And then what you should get for an answer is 1. And so what we would enter into the computer, if this was a question on Respondus for your math quizzes this week in 227, you would just enter a 1. We would not enter 1.0 because we're never going to have that trailing 0. We're not going to enter 1, and then we're not going to type in tab, because we don't type in any type of label. We're just going to type in a 1. Easy as that. All right, so if the last decimal place is greater than 5, then we're going to round up, just like you guys probably have learned in previous college courses or in high school. So if we were doing something and we were told to round to the tenths or that first decimal place, and our calculator upon our dimensional analysis problem told us that our answer was 2.88, we needed to round to this tenths place here, this first decimal. We would round that to 2.9. If our answer was 2.49, we'd round that to 2.5. And if we had a 0.35, we would round that to 0.4. Looking at rule number 7 from our math rules from the DNP handbook, if it's less than 5, we're going to drop that decimal and round down, or we're going to round down after that last decimal. So if our answer was 2.81 and the instructions were to round to the nearest, or round to the first decimal, or that tenths place, we would be looking at this, and so we would round to 2.8. Whoops, wrong way. If our answer was 1.44, we would just round that to 1.4. And if we were at 0.32, we would just do a 0.3. So you're going to round up when this number is 5 or higher, and you're going to just leave it where it is if it is below 5. We do want to make sure not to round too early, and so what you want to do is keep all of the steps of your problem in your calculator, and then you want to round at the very, very end of the problem. Don't round after each step. This mainly will apply to Chapter 11 in Hornfeld when we talk about body surface area, and so I'm going to specifically talk about it during the integrity for that math lesson. If we talk about a client in pounds and the provider has ordered something in kilograms, what we will do then is round convert pounds to kilograms, and in that case you would want to keep hundredths in that math problem. So 23 pounds equals 10.45 kilograms, and that's just to increase the accuracy of the dose that we would be administering. So keep to that hundredth or that second decimal place for kilograms. Make sure that you follow the directions when you're rounding. And so in my math quizzes and worksheets, I have went through them with a fine-tooth comb, and I think every single problem should tell you round to the nearest whole number or round to the nearest tenths, round to the nearest hundredth. But if I did miss something, then what you want to do is make sure you follow the guidelines that we're going to talk about next. We know that we need to look at what we're rounding for and what we're representing. And so when we look at what we're rounding to, we want to think about what we're representing. And so if we were talking about drops and you were figuring out a drop rate for a manual drip rate for an infusion, you can't give or administer a quarter of a drop. So we would have to then make sure that we're giving a whole drop. When we look at syringes, think about the syringe that you're going to be using. If you're administering something with a TB syringe, you could use the hundredths. You could round to the hundredths, because when you're using a very small syringe like this, you could give 0.47 milliliters. That would be fine. But if you were giving a volume, over a milliliter, you couldn't realistically administer 2.46 milliliters. You would need to round that up to the 10th place, or to that first decimal. So sometimes you just kind of need to think about the volume and the type of way that it would be administered. When we look at milliliters, there should be instructions as far as tenths or hundredths. If drops, again, you can't do a quarter of a drop or a half of a drop. Units, when we look at insulin, you can't give a half of a unit of insulin. So again, units are always going to be a whole number. When you think of a capsule, you can break it open and sprinkle it out, but there's no way to break a capsule in half without having all the contents pour out into a million pieces. So you have to give a whole capsule. Most of the time, tablets you can break in half. However, 9 out of 10 tablets aren't able to be quartered. And so unless your worksheet specifically said round your tablet to the nearest quarter, you would usually just say whole or half tablets. And then when you get done with your calculation, think about if it makes sense. If I'm going to figure out how much Tylenol to give an infant, and my final answer is to give that infant 56 milliliters of Tylenol, think of the volume of 56 milliliters, and that just doesn't make sense to give to an infant. And so you always want to think about, does that volume make sense? If you're doing a calculation and you're going to give your client 46 tablets, does that really ever make sense? Are you really ever going to give your client 46 tablets of something? That might kind of alert you to double check your math and kind of take a step back and look at the whole picture. When we look at what the NCLEX requires for math, there are going to be problems that you'll need to use the decimal. And so again, if your answer was 2.8 and you were instructed to round to that first decimal or that 10th place, you would need to enter 2 and then the actual decimal point and 8. You wouldn't just enter 2.8, because that would obviously change your answer. And the answers for NCLEX also will need to be rounded at the end of the calculation per their rounding guidelines. So they will give you instructions exactly like how I have set up with the math quizzes and the math exams. Each problem will tell you, round to the 10th place or that first decimal. There is remediation for math, and so remediation is found on Blackboard. We talked about this a little bit during orientation, but just to highlight it again now, you will need to score 100% on the math quizzes each week in order to not have to remediate. If you get one wrong and you're at a 90%, all the math quizzes are 10 questions. So if you would not get 100%, if you score 90 or below, you do need to remediate. And so the math remediation can be found on the Nursing 227 course homepage, and that does need to be completed within a certain time frame, which is allotted on the page. You need to have it done by that next week by Friday at 5 o'clock. And if you did score a 60% or low on any of the math quizzes, you'll need to meet with an instructor at your site. This concludes the integrity for math for the Dakota Nursing Program Dimensional Analysis. And if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to email me, call me, let me know. But this is just kind of a basic overview so that hopefully you guys have a great start to math this year. Have a great rest of the day.